Ryan, hey, thank you for joining our podcast today. Um,
Yeah, happy to
so
be here.
yeah, so before we go into our topics of today, what's Blended Edge about? Well, what are you guys doing?
We help software companies build out primarily product integrations and do it, faster, easier, more cost effectively. We recognize that there's a little bit of a decentralization happening in the integration space where a lot of software vendors don't necessarily want to send their customers off to a partner integrator to do all the integration work for them.
Mm-hmm.
Primarily talking about B2B software companies, usually SaaS too. Um, they want to have the integrations offered as part of their product, and the software vendors are having a hard time with that. It's a difficult task to take on. It's expensive and it takes a long time. And there's some software coming out that helps with that, but there's a long way to go. So we are setting out to help solve that problem and help software vendors just be a lot more effective with building out product integrations.
I was wondering the logo of Blended Edge is a kind of special logo. You should have a look. But what's what does it represent?
It doesn't really represent much other than I used a pretty low price logo generator tool and I liked it and it seemed kind of relevant to what we're doing. When we named the business, to be honest, we started with what sounds reasonably aligned with integration and the things that we're doing, and I
Yeah.
can get a .com for with one or two simple English words.
Okay.
We'll see if that name persists over the long term, but it's what we needed to get started, and that's where we went.
All right. And so your main market is are the software vendors who want to integrate with other tools.
Yeah,
Um,
we're usually looking for a SaaS vendor because most software companies are SaaS. Not that there's necessarily a restriction that we couldn't work with somebody who's not a SaaS company.
mm,
Typically, Series A or later, but in the growth stage because that's when this problem becomes most acute for the software company. They tend to have really high growth expectations, especially if they've taken venture capital,
mm,
and generally they have some amount, sometimes a significant amount of potential customer demand kind of pent up behind availability of certain integrations. So you got a bunch of customers that say, I love your product, I want to sign up, but I can't do it until you integrate to insert here.
yeah.
And the faster that the company's able to say, hey, we have that now, the faster they're able to unlock that revenue
Yeah.
potential. And that pattern, is pretty consistent. So that's usually the focus. But there's also, there's a world where more mature companies who have built out a huge product integration program, and now it's starting to be kind of cumbersome in terms of cost. There's opportunity to work there, as well as you call them legacy software companies that are kind of trying to update their product to meet the newer cloud paradigms and to compete with SaaS companies that are kind of coming up behind them. There's opportunity to help there as well.
So do you see any trend of type of integrations which are coming up a lot?
Well, you see the big boys quite a bit. Everybody needs a Salesforce integration. Everybody needs a Shopify integration if you're in digital commerce. Everybody needs an SAP integration, and that's just because those companies have such a huge position in their ecosystems that you almost can't avoid
Mm,
having an integration to those to be, to serve your customer needs. I think one trend that you do see happening is that the long tail of products that you need integrations to is getting longer. So there's
mhm,
always those few hub technologies that are kind of a given that you have to have, but then there's dozens and dozens and dozens and continually more smaller niche products that your customers are buying for point solutions, and they all kind of need to be stitched together in this
mm,
technology stack that serves their need. So you kind of can't get away with just having 3 or 4 integrations anymore. You have to be able to integrate to a really long list of them.
mm,
A good example, look in digital commerce, just or e-commerce, whatever you want to call it. There's Shopify, Magento, BigCommerce if you're in the mid-market, and there's, a handful of enterprise ones, SAP Hybris and Salesforce Commerce Cloud in the enterprise. And then there's a really long list of lesser known ones behind them. And then, look at all the different solutions you build around your e-commerce platform to handle things like order fulfillment and email marketing and yada, yada, yada. Pretty soon, if you are in that space and you're serving those customers, you've got a whole ecosystem that's constantly growing of potential integrations that you need to have in your product so that you can say yes to that customer who maybe wants to buy yours.
Yeah. Yeah, interesting because how do you deal with such an environment which is expanding all the time, and maintaining your integration must be cumbersome, right? It's not easy to ensure that you keep compatibilities.
You're absolutely right. It's not easy. Actually, if you go to our homepage, the big banner when you load it up is integration is hard. We take the approach that you're kind of stuck between a rock and a hard place as a software vendor, because unless you're an integration software provider, which the vast majority of people are not, your core value to your customers, the thing that your investors invested in, the competency that you have as the founder, CEO, whatever of the company, is not integration. But at the same time, you are required to be good at it for you to be able to kind of master this ecosystem problem. Some people kind of punt and just partner out on this, and you can get away with that for a while, but you're going to get overtaken by a competitor who does say, you know what, no, we're going to be good at this, and builds that competency. But the key is you have to do it in a way that doesn't distract from your core business, that doesn't take away from building your core product, all that kind of a thing. So we kind of look at it in there's sort of two parts to being good at that. One is you have to have the integration framework or technology in place that allows you to eliminate as many of the technical variables as possible. We typically almost always recommend an embedded iPaaS or an embedded integration framework to be the engine or the technology underlying all your product integrations, because there's really no reason for you to reinvent the wheel about how you move data between APIs, whether be it your API and somebody else's. It's been done. There are awesome ones out there. Use somebody else's. So we start there, get the right technology in place. Don't try to build it yourself, and then use that to build on top of it. Then the second part, because the technology is not going to do it on its own, is you have to have a process and a discipline in place of understanding what your integration opportunities are. And sometimes your customers will just tell you, but sometimes you have to go fishing for them. And then how do you prioritize them, truly understand the use cases that they address for your customer, and ultimately boil that down to an executable integration that you can deploy on that technology. And that whole process of vetting and designing integrations is actually where I think there's a bigger struggle for most of the software companies. That's hard work. And it's specialized work. So you kind of have to master those two things without making it your core business. And to be frank, that's what we help software companies do.
Yeah. So do you have any idea how much of a load it means for a software vendor to build that integration capability? Is that something that takes years, or?
It really depends on the nature of the integrations they need, how many they need, what their internal capabilities are. We usually say, give it 6 months of doing the process right and having the right technology in place and kind of building that muscle, and you'll start to see some significant benefit to what's happening. It's sort of one of those things that you always want to be improving. So, take 12 months, take 24 months down the road, you should continue to see better and better returns from the time you're putting in. And usually that means, you're getting better and better at getting integrations out faster, and they're higher quality, so you're spending less time on them. And that's pulling forward revenue. Typically when when we're talking to a potential customer and we're kind of building the business case, we're usually looking at a 2-year forward-looking sort of budget or business case. But you're not waiting 2 years before you're seeing benefits. You start to see there's a lot of low-hanging fruit, and you'll start to see benefit very quickly.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. How is security being handled? I know that that's always a concern in SaaS and cloud.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, could you tell something from that?
Definitely, it has a lot to do with the integration technology that you
Yeah.
use, and that's one of the big reasons that we say don't try to build this yourself. That's maybe you can build something that moves the data really, really nicely, but it's a whole extra level of complexity to do it in a way that is compliant with data security policies and rules and all that kind of stuff. So, just take an example, the two technologies that we bring into the conversation when we're, talking about here's what your options are. One is a pretty well-known commercial offering. And one of the reasons we vetted them and decided to go with them as a partner is because they have all that stuff figured out, and they have their SOC 2 compliance, and they understand the technology importance of things like GDPR and data privacy regulations and all that kind of stuff. And it just comes baked into the product. So if you are willing to pay for the commercial offering, you're paying to have that taken care of for you, so you don't have to have as much concern with it. Now, our other option is open source, which means you're not paying a big license fee for it, but you as the software vendor have to incorporate what that product does into your already existing, hopefully, data security compliance and all that kind of stuff. So you do take a bigger burden of understanding that and making sure that you're following the rules. But even with the open source model, the technology is built such that it can support all those rules effectively. It is built enterprise ready and best practice. You just have to take the responsibility yourself.
Yeah. Okay. Interesting. Especially like the commercial offering, really taking that burden off your shoulder, and ensure that the security, which is a big concern, is being taken care of. Yeah.
Oh yeah, and if you think about the types of things that, at least in our world, you see moving through these integrations most frequently, it's customer records, it's orders, whatever that means. Maybe it's an e-commerce order, maybe it's something completely different, but an order, no matter what you're buying, they all are basically the same thing. And that has sensitive information. There's things like pricing, but there's also contact information, addresses, etc. There might be payment information. Yeah. So the core use cases for most integrations we run into, you're moving data entities that are already flagged as sensitive in terms of data compliance.
Okay. Now, of course, whenever you start to work with as a software vendor with other vendors with whom you're going to integrate, I guess that the relationship is not only on the technical level, where you agree on REST APIs and whatever, and the authentication and all this. Do you see anything in your business evolving there, like how things are being set up?
There is definitely a really, really close relationship between the team that's handling the software integration, the technical moving data between APIs part, and the partnership team that establishes a relationship between the two companies, kind of, the handshake relationship, or sometimes a formal referral based or some kind of business oriented relationship. Those two things are kind of two sides of the same coin. And in fact, most of the time when we start to talk to a software company that we potentially work with, the first conversation I'm having is with the partner organization, because the partner organization feels this pain point most acutely. So if you think about what they're doing, they're going out into the world and trying to find other software products that offer, compatible things to the same customers, or when put together, you can kind of sell solutions together. They're trying to build all these different relationships in the ecosystem. And as soon as you find somebody you want to be friends with, so to speak, the next conversation is somebody has to go to their product manager and say, okay, can we build this now? And that's where this gets challenging, because now you're getting in line behind a queue of other product features. You have to justify the business case over a lot of other possible priorities. There's never enough time in the development team to get everything done. And the fact that all of this is hard and takes more time than it needs to just,
Mm-hmm.
adds fuel to the fire of that challenging conversation. So yeah, the partner organization and the way you're building relationships with other software vendors plays a big role. Not the least of which, it helps you, if you have a good relationship with a partner, it helps you collaborate on what the integration should do, where there are gaps in one or the other API, how you can address those, etc.
Yeah, okay. But I also think that there's also an opportunity for co-marketing, these type of things that that can help your business as a software vendor. Well, can help grow your business as a software vendor, right?
100%. When you are building an integration, or even when a customer says, I want an integration to this thing, nobody actually wants an integration. What we use the term inner product experience to describe what they actually want. What your customer does is they have some set of things they do every day to accomplish their job. And I've seen studies that say that on average, most business users use 8 or more pieces of software on a daily basis. So they've got a thing they need to get done, and there's no such thing as one piece of software that solves all their problems. So they're bouncing around between products all day. When they say I want an integration to X, what they're really saying is I need you two software companies to pair up and create a more seamless experience for me to get my job done. And that's really the root of what you're trying to build together. So when you and the partner organization, or the partner that you've established, do have that integration built, and it does serve that inner product experience, then absolutely, that's a huge marketing opportunity, because you're jointly going to your customers and saying, hey, that thing that you have to do manually, or that takes you longer than you want it to, or is a pain in your butt, whatever. If you use our two products together, it's a lot easier for you, and it's a win-win-win.
Yeah. Do you see any offerings, like packaged offerings, combining multiple products of different SaaS providers?
Well, I mean, that's what an iPaaS does effectively, an integration platform as a service.
Which one?
Well, there's a lot of them. I mean, Zapier is probably the most well-known one, because
Yeah.
it's pretty well adopted. Now it's really, really good at doing a wide range of shallow integrations. It's not built to do sophisticated, complex integrations. And then there's a whole, other spectrum of versions of Zapier, so to speak. Like we work with Workato, for instance, and there's this open source one that we work. And just go read the Gartner reports. There's hundreds of them that handle different types of pulling these SaaS companies together and moving data between them.
Yeah, okay, but that's. I was just wondering if it would be possible, like two companies offering one package to the market, meaning a combination of a CRM and an ERP or somewhat.
Oh, like co-selling together. Yeah, I mean, you have to have. I think usually when you see that, one company or the other has a reseller relationship where they're kind of selling both their product and the partner product as a bundle. I've certainly had a lot of conversations or been involved in sales processes where you've got a sales rep from both companies teaming up and kind of all having the same conversation together, which practically speaking, that ends up being the more common way to do it, because everybody has their own contracts and their own paper and their own lawyers and that kind of thing.
Interesting. Interesting. Okay, so I was looking at your site, and you got a lot of blog items there, which are really really interesting. And one of them was attracting my attention a lot, and that's the developer experience blog item. So I was wondering, because that's a new term that I didn't hear about it. So could you explain what this is about?
Absolutely. That's not a term we came up with, but you're right. It's not a term that probably gets used enough. And I would also put an asterisk on the term, which I'll come back to in a bit. So developer experience basically describes, much like the user experience, the experience of your customer navigating through your application, how the UI looks, clicking on things, what are they feeling throughout the whole thing. it's kind of the translation of that for the person who is consuming your APIs, which is usually a developer who's writing code against them. Because if they're building software or writing code to talk to your API, they're not using the user interface necessarily. Their interface is the application programming interface. So much like if you have a crappy looking API that's hard to navigate and not well documented and not intuitive, if your API has all those same attributes, your developer that's trying to write code against the API has a pretty poor experience as well. So things like, do you have good documentation that's up to date, that's clear, that gives examples, et cetera, that creates a better developer experience. Are you using standards in how you built the API that are predictable? REST being probably the most common one. If you understand how REST APIs work, if it's a product or a domain you've never seen before, you can still kind of look at the API and understand what it's doing because there's common patterns there. You know, does the API behave the way it's supposed to, or is it unreliable or unstable? All of those, you know, when that happens, you can document all you want, but if it's a, you know, crapshoot every time the developer hits the API with a request, what's going to happen? Not a good experience. So just really applying the same principles that a UI designer would apply for the UI of an app. It's kind of translated to the developer's experience with an API. Now, the asterisk I put on the term developer experience is we are trying to create a world and advocate for a world by using things like an embedded iPaaS that the developer is not required to take on the majority or ideally any of the work to do the integration. Developers are expensive. They have more important things to build oftentimes in a software company. So as much as possible, our goal is to take the developer out of the equation. But the concept of the developer experience still applies, because if you're an integration analyst, for instance, who is a semi-technical but more business-oriented person who is building integrations on an existing framework or designing integrations on that framework, you still need all the same things. You still need good API documentation. You still need predictability. You still need patterns that you recognize to make that easier.
Yeah, right. So it's also important for maintenance, I think, of your integrations. If to have a stable, robust API that remains the same for a long time.
Yeah. And then that also means, I mean, the reality is your API is going to have to be updated sometimes. Now, you make breaking changes as absolutely little as possible, but you do have to make them sometimes. So again, part of that strong developer experience is that you have a graceful, predictable way to version your API, and you've got a developer experience team or a community management team, whatever you want to call it, that does an effective job communicating what's coming, giving you lead time when changes are coming up, helping you understand what the changes are so that integrations and code written against APIs and all that sort of thing can be updated in advance of the new ones coming out. You know, if you're just pushing out breaking changes to your API, you may not even have any visibility on how many other pieces of software you're breaking if you don't know who's consuming your API.
Exactly. And so, as part of your services, do you also advise the software vendors for any integration that they can offer to their market? Do you understand what I want to say? So they can integrate with not the service by calling the APIs of the other vendor, but also they can offer an API for their customers to integrate with their product.
Yeah, I mean, it's all kind of the same soup of things that need to be accomplished, right? And even when you're building a native product integration to somebody else, you still should be doing it through your own API. Now, it might be packaged up in such a way that to the end customer, it looks like it's part of the software product, but you really shouldn't be building behind the scenes or behind the wall integrations out to other products. You should still be treating it as an API to API based integration. And yeah, when you're looking at what your integration opportunities are and what you're trying to build out in terms of use cases you want to support for customers and mutual customers with these integration partners, a big part of that is you have to look at your own API and understand, you know, where are the limitations to serving those use cases, what needs to be updated, what needs to be fixed, etc. So you kind of naturally end up in a, what do we have to do to our API conversation? If you don't have an API, then it's a different version, which is, okay, we have to build one. How should we build this most effectively and
Exactly.
within standards, etc.
Yeah, exactly. So there was a topic I was waiting to talk about is standards. So what type of standards should people look at whenever they start doing integrations? Do you have some examples?
Sure. I mean, standards in terms of what APIs. So, okay, there's a couple ways to look at that problem. So when you're evaluating, let's say you've got 15 different potential integrations you're evaluating. And there's actually a blog post about this on our site as well. We think you need to look at kind of two aspects of those integrations to help you prioritize which ones you take on when. One is effort and one is impact to the business. On the effort scale, the ones that are integrations to APIs that, to circle back to the previous point, have a strong or an effective developer experience, that's going to lower your effort to build the integration. So just that aspect should not, put it up a few notches in your priority list. So when you're looking at them, look for REST APIs, for instance. If it's a well-documented REST API that uses things like the Open API standard, you're going to have an easier time prioritizing that integration higher because it's going to be easier to build. GraphQL is another one that, as long as it's well documented, tends to be a pretty easy one to integrate to, because it's prescriptive of what it's doing. It's pretty predictable. It's based on standards. When it comes to building your API, that's a little bit different of a conversation. Now, the most common standards are still probably the best to go with because they're the most well understood. But in that case, you sort of need to look through the lens of what are your API consumers' needs, so you use the right tool for the process.
But I was also wondering, is there like standards for the messages that are being exchanged? So what's in the JSON? What's the structure of these JSONs? Or is that the Wild West?
Yeah, I find mostly it's Wild West, and that could be just the nature of the domains we tend to play in. There are some industries that do have standard data structures, and there's a whole bunch more that attempt it and never really succeed in getting the overall market to adopt a standard. So in our opinion, the part of the art of being really good at integration is being really good at navigating around those incompatibilities and knowing how to transform data that represents the same thing, but is structured differently, effectively. Like take an order, for instance. An order is an order is an order. Doesn't matter what system it's coming from. It's got line items, it's got addresses, it's got a total, right? But the data structure, there's no standard JSON data structure for what an order should look like. So you need to be able to understand how to, translate those between different systems. And instead of hoping somebody builds a standard so that you don't have to deal with the problem, the better approach is to get really good at dealing with that problem.
All right, I can follow that point of view. Interesting. Everything. It's really focused on how can software vendors integrate or provide an integration in their product, and the approach of it. Yeah, interesting. Thank you for the details.
Yeah, absolutely. If you guys want to check out our website, we have some really good blog content out there. It's blendededge.com, and it's /blog if you want the blog. And then certainly any software companies who would like to talk about their integration strategy, how they're approaching it, are looking for help building out product integrations, marketplaces for their product integrations, all of that stuff we help with. So definitely reach out to us and we're happy to talk.
Okay. Thank you, Ryan.
Thank you.